Hello. Good afternoon. Sorry for being a bit late. I've, I've just finished an interview in the other side of the venue, and sorry for that. My apologies. So, friends, let me start with today's discussion. And it is about of shaping the climate and nature convergence to address the intertwined crisis. So what we will have today, it is an exploration journey. Let me call it, we are going all together to explore. To explore what? We are all the time saying that we have to address intertwined crisis. That sounds fantastic. Now we are saying we have to put together our climate and nature objectives. We have to produce collaboration in relation to the climate and the nature objective. Fantastic. But the point is what kind of mechanism we could use to promote an effective convergence. What is those kind of things that we have to start to think to promote that convergence? Let me put an example, because I have heard in this some good examples of that convergence. Many organizations are working in promoting renewable energies. What it is fantastic. We have to switch our energy matrix into being a clean matrix with strong facilities of renewables, solar, wind, among some others. But that needs land. That needs huge space of land. And the point is that we should do that without affecting biodiversity. We should do that by not affecting rights. We should do that by respecting rights of people and by consulting them. So probably we should start to think on some ideas on permitting and siting. That is key. As now with a mining facility or with an oil facility, everybody knows what are the impact that those kind of facilities could cause. And we have for years, for decades, we have written a lot of rules on how to do it in the most sustainable way if possible. But now we are not talking about mining or hydrocarbons. We are trying to phase out fossil fuels. We are moving to the clean energies. So how to address that in an effective way? What are that mechanisms that could promote global rules for the planet to be effective in what I've already mentioned, biodiversity, rights, consultation, among some others. That is one key idea to do it. But also when we think about climate and nature, and today we will have Gonzalo Muñoz, my brother, and former champion of the climate action agenda representing Chile at that time, probably when we think about how can we address the intertwined crisis in an effective way, you know that we are planning to strengthen and to develop and to strengthen the action agenda for the CBD. We hope that in Montreal we can do that. Okay, if we get it, as we think in an optimistic way that we can do it, how should we collaborate? What should we do to avoid to start from scratch? No? How much it could be effective to have the action agenda for nature, convening actors, but in a collaborative way with the climate action agenda. That is something that we have to explore. What is that kind of element that we can develop to promote that collaboration? But also we have the low-hanging fruit, nature-based solutions. Because nature-based solutions, as I am always insisting and repeating, it is a mechanism that it could be effective if we can guarantee that our intervention, it is strongly based in high quality standards. Because what it is nature-based solutions? It is an intervention that it is focused in addressing a societal challenge, that it could be mitigation, it could be adaptation, water security, food security, disaster risk reduction, but also a societal challenge that it has been well documented. And because it is well documented, you can report against that plan. So it is not that I say, okay, I will build a park here in the corner and that is nature-based solution. No. If you are not addressing a well-documented societal challenge that is not nature-based solution. But the second value of MBS, it is that the intervention of nature should guarantee two things: biodiversity net gain and ecosystem integrity. So that is why when somebody tell me, look, Manuel, it is a trillion trees initiative. Good, sounds good. But what happens if some of those new trees are affecting the integrity of an ecosystem? That is not MBS. So how can we guarantee that? It is by having the CBD playing a role in relation to MBS. And that is why we are insisting to have in the GBF in Montreal in 3 weeks, the CBD adopting MBS as a useful mechanism to guarantee that second value. And the third value it is that MBS must be always a rights-based mechanism. It must guarantee rights, it must respect traditional knowledge, and it should produce social benefits. So that is a mechanism that it is integrating. So those are the mechanisms that we should to think on. So that it is about today's conversation. I hope that it can be very participatory conversation, because the idea it is to explore how to do. Yesterday we had an event here in which we were discussing COP to COP how to unlock the mobilization of resources when we integrate climate and biodiversity. And today we will have in the panel somebody representing Bandes, a Brazilian development bank from Brazil. So probably he will help us to understand how the convergence could help to unlock more resources. So again, that it is about to think in the future on how much the convergence could help us by developing new mechanisms to be more effective. What it could be the benefit of integrating the climate NDCs with the biodiversity NBSAPs. I used to be Minister of the Environment of Peru, and how difficult it is in a low-income or middle-income country to address different obligations from different conventions in a different time, because you don't have all the capacity to do that. So let's think how can we integrate NDCs with NBSAPs and how both of them could be connected to a long-term strategy. Those are the things that we would like to explore while thinking about this newly created IUCN Climate Crisis Commission. Because the idea of the IUCN Climate Crisis Commission, it is to exploit that convening power and that expertise of IUCN with nature to help to address the climate crisis. That is the idea of that commission. So that is why we have organized today's event. So I hope that my words have helped you to understand the framing of today's discussion. I will be here in the front row because who will moderate this panel, it is my good friend Sandeep Samgupta from IUCN, and he will invite all the panelists to the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manuel. You are always such a difficult act to follow. But ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to this important session. I mean, it's all about bringing the nature and the climate agendas together. And to do so, we have a very distinguished set of panelists today who will be taking us through some of the opportunities and challenges in this space. So without any further ado, may I invite the panelists to please come up to the stage and I'll introduce them. So Minister McCallum, Gonzalo Munoz, Gustavo Montezano, Christina Voigt, and I think we have one missing panelist, but who should join us hopefully very quickly. Sorry? I'm going to sit here till the final panelists arrive, and then I'm going to let her sit here, and I'm going to take the floor. Great. Let me first begin by introducing our very distinguished panelists. So on the far left, we have Myrie McCallum, who is the Minister for Environment, Biodiversity and Land Reform of Scotland. Welcome, Mary. Then also on the left, we have Christina Voigt, who is the chair of the IUCN Commission on Environmental Law. She is also a professor at the University of Oslo, and she is also here on the Norwegian delegation and a long-term negotiator for Norway. And on my right, on my far right, I have the pleasure of introducing Gonzalo Munoz, who of course needs no introduction in this space, because he has been the climate champion for this entire process since COP25, for the 2-year period that he held this office. 3-year period, thanks to COVID. And then our final panelists that we have here, Mr. Gustavo Montezano, who is the president of the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES. Yeah? So with no further ado, I think we can jump straight to the questions, and maybe I'll direct the first question at you, Minister McCallum. Now the UK, of course, last year we were all gathered in Glasgow, and even before we had gathered in Glasgow, the UK had already made nature and nature-based solutions a key priority of the COP26 presidency. And one of the remarkable outcomes, as most of us will recall, Virginia, please, why don't you join? Yeah? So, yeah, let me take this opportunity to introduce, sorry, Minister. Yeah, let me take the opportunity to introduce our final panelists, Virginia Young, who is a member of the IUCN World Commission for Protected Areas. She is part of the Climate Change Specialist Group of that commission, and she is also a member of the Task Force for Primary Forests of that commission. So welcome, Virginia. So returning to the question, Mr. McCallum, we were talking about the important role that the UK COP26 presidency played in highlighting the role of nature and nature-based solutions last year. And one of the real tangible outcomes that came out of that COP was this very clear recognition for the first time by UNFCCC parties of the interlinkage that exists between the climate and the biodiversity crisis, and the critical role that nature and ecosystems can play in delivering benefits for both climate change mitigation and adaptation. And of course, Scotland itself has been a leader in the space of nature-based solutions. Scotland has been part of the One Challenge. I think Scotland made a pledge of bringing under restoration 170,000 hectares of degraded land. So, with this background in mind, could you share some experiences of what your expectations would be in terms of what more can be done, both at the domestic level, but also at the international level, to bring the climate and the biodiversity agendas together? Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to share this esteemed panel. It's a real pleasure to do so. So first of all, for Scotland's part, we fundamentally believe that the crisis of climate change and of the degradation of our natural world are utterly intertwined and indivisible. We know that we need to tackle climate change in order to protect our natural world, and that we need equilibrium in our natural world to help us tackle climate change. I suppose on your question about where do we go from here, how do we drive progress, and speaking domestically first, well, as a politician and as a policy maker, the way that people feel about the actions that we take is very important to me. And we were just discussing prior to coming on here about how the discussions that I have with people, when you mention climate change, they think about species loss. So actually, in the mind of the public, the two are already indivisible, and actually sometimes it's the structures that we may have created which have separated that. So for my part, we've tried very hard to make clear to the public in Scotland, as we've been pursuing a range of policies from forest creation to peatland restoration to marine protection, trying to demonstrate the co-benefits that delivers for people, and to demonstrate how, for example, our peatland restoration programme will help to sequester carbon, it will support ecosystems, it will create jobs, actually. And in that way, by demonstrating that to the public, you're able to make far greater progress than you might otherwise be able to. And then on the international sphere, we did get very close at Glasgow to the inclusion of nature-based solutions within the formal agreement. We would want to continue to see that, and we would want to see progress on that. And not being a state party, we're not party to that, but we would certainly call for it. And actually, we might come on to this later, and I'm sure our colleague from banking will be able to help us in this. But unlocking finance that people can have faith in, to have integrity and to be additional and to be that people can have faith in, I think, is one of the big ways that we unlock progress.
Great, thank you so much, Minister. So we've heard a really important perspective from government. So that was one end of the panel. Let's jump straight away to the other extreme end of the panel. So I'm going to ask you, Gonzalo, I mean, as part of the high-level champion, you've co-led, co-created the Race to Zero, the Race to Resilience initiatives. And of course, as we all know, nature has a central role to play in delivering benefits for both mitigation, but also, extremely importantly, adaptation. But this is something that, has been taken up quite prominently by governments in many cases, but perhaps less so and less evenly by the private sector. So what do you think is the role that the private sector can play in bringing together greater convergence between the climate and the nature agendas?
Thank you so much, Sandeep, and thank you to the WWF and UCN for us here and having us today. Thank you, my dear brother Manuel, for not only opening this session, but also for the work on bridging between the two conventions, because it's absolutely critical. Besides having played a role as a high-level champion for the last 3 years, and then now with the advisory board, prior to that, and even still, I am an entrepreneur. I am a business person. I believe in the power of business as a force for good. And I remember perfectly in the moment when I joined the role and the mandate, I was really surprised on the capacity of siloing the different topics. So from someone that is outside of the negotiations and the process, it seems weird. Of course, if you go back on time and you understand what happened probably in 1992, it probably makes sense to have these different conventions that we have in so many aspects. But if I can provoke with my answer, I think that the issue of having climate and biodiversity disconnected and with their challenges on negotiation, somehow I think that might be it sounds like a sense of obsolescence of the multilateralism in somehow, and therefore should provoke a possibility of rethinking on how to address these topics potentially, and that would be not only my provocation, but the Secretary General will say as well, through the multi-stakeholder multilateralism. Is the multi-stakeholder multilateralism a possibility of converging in the different conventions and different challenges that we are confronting? Because it's weird when you think that the climate crisis stands only in relation to CO2 molecules and people suffering the consequences, as we know, and you don't realize that, of course, this is a consequence in other aspects of the way we have treated the biodiversity, as Manuel explained so well. So in that sense, I think that we need to listen to science much more. I think that in the case of climate, that's probably what had happened in the last years. Science has been much more centered in the discussions, and when we do that, it will appear very clearly that connection between the different challenges. When it comes to businesses, probably that's how business perceive this topic. It's hard for a business to understand that I relate to nature some days and some ways in relation to CO2 equivalent molecules and other aspects in relation to the richness of the soil or the richness of a certain ecosystem. It's all absolutely interlinked. A company operates in an ecosystem that requires to be healthy in every single aspect. It's about water, it's about the capacity of restoring any type of pollution, it's about avoiding, we're now entering to a process of negotiation on plastics as well, avoid plastic contamination. We require an ocean that is absolutely healthy. All of those elements are part of the same equation when you perceive that from the business point of view. That's why I'm extremely excited of coming from the science logic to have now science-based network and TNFD and other tools that will provide the mechanisms for the businesses and the financial institutions to operate, taking all of these topics into consideration. Of course, I keep the dream on having less understanding of different challenges, but much more common, not only challenges. I'm changing the word of, we're not only facing common challenges, we not only have common goals, we have common limits. It's about that. It's the limits that we have sometimes overcrossed, and therefore we need to solve that by regenerating nature that will allow us to probably solve all the rest. When it comes to Race to Zero, of course, many of the companies that are part of the Race to Zero, and as well as the municipalities and the financial institutions and the academics, the academic institutions that are there know perfectly well that nature-based solutions are absolutely fundamental in order to reach the net zero emissions. And when it comes to Race to Resilience, when you think about the main three thematic areas where we work, coastal areas, urban areas, and rural areas, and the 30 breakthroughs or the 30 Sharm el-Sheikh action agenda topics, most of them, if not all of them, are using nature-based solutions to address the urgent need of communities that are confronting the crisis to thrive despite of the crisis. So from the business perspective, this is not only evident, this is something that as long as you understand it, you're celebrating it. And I'm putting a lot of my hope on the work that Manuel will do in Montreal. We will be there, Manuel, supporting you, helping you to champion that CBD in order to reach any type of objective that we all require. And I hope that we can bring all the effort, not only from the business sector, but all non-state actors to be on your service, to be in the service of biodiversity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gonzalo, for those really thought-provoking remarks. So, Gustavo, let me now turn to you. As the president of a national development bank and also as a member of the International Development Finance Club, what does this notion of bringing together the nature and climate agendas mean for you? And if I can add a second question to that, building on what Minister McKeldin said, in terms of financing the changes that we need to see in order to bring these agendas together, what do you think is the role of national development banks?
Perfect. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'll be speaking here with two hats. First is a South Hemisphere hat. We are Brazilian South Americans. And second, as a banker hat, because the only thing I did in my life is investment banking. And then I spent the last 3 years in the developing bank world. And for us, financial actors, I would say it's not obvious to divide climate for environment, as Gonzalo said. When I started studying that, I would say 5 to 6 years ago, when the scientists explained to me the division between climate and environment, I took some time to get it. And even today, it's tough to do so. So the financial system in general, it's quite natural to link both opportunities together. And then I will answer a question together with the minister comments. And my message here to you on how to unlock financial commitments and financial flows, I like to say that we need to be less financial centric when we discuss financing, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Financing is an intermediary. It's never an end. We finance for someone to do something, to come to the ground, to build up a factory. So thinking as an intermediary, the qualitative aspects of the financing, they are as important as the numbers. And I see we spend a lot of time with billions and 10 billions and 5 billions and X billion reais or dollars. But together with the notional, we have the collateral, we have the time, we have the tenor, we have the price, we have the risk, we have the operator, we have the regulation. So thinking about the whole value chain of the financial as of today, I think is more important than the notional by itself. And let me give you an example about what happened in Brazil on the water and sanitation market. We've been struggling to mobilize water and sanitation financing for 30 years. In 2020, we have a congressional bill where we reframework the sector, and then BNDES as a development bank, not financing, but preparing the projects. What happened in the last 2 years? We mobilized $15 billion in 2 years only for water and sanitation in Brazil, which means that, as Gonzalo is saying here, it is a business opportunity on the climate transition. It is a business opportunity on the nature-based solution. However, we still don't have the framework. We still don't have the, I would say, proper operators or the business environment to deploy the money. So in a South Hemisphere bottleneck, we see as the main challenge having the regulation and the operators who do understand and deploy the money. And to finish my initial remark, in order to improve that, I think YUCN or WWF, you have a critical role on the reskilling agenda. And when we speak about reskilling, we usually think about low qualified job, but to have a huge reskilling on the CEOs, on the traders, on the financial risk guys. And I'm a young CEO, I have 42 years. I'm studying that for the last 5 years, and to be very humble, I should know much more than climate and for nature-based solutions that I know today. But if you go to the risk officer guy, to the trader guy, to the commercial guy, to the one that's implementing the thing on the last mile, we need to qualify people on the climate and nature-based solution thematic, but on a practical way. So at this moment, we don't have time to wait the trainee of BNDES to become the CEO in 20, 30 years. We need to act now. And the main challenge I see in order to develop this regulation, this methodology, and this implementation flow is not about capital mobilization. It's about capital deployment and skilling of the C-level people ground, both on the real money sector and on the financial sector. That's why institutes like WWF and YCN, you have a critical role to be played on reskilling guys like myself. I'm trying my best for the last 5 years. I'm very humble. I should be knowing much more than climate than I know today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gustavo, for those really thoughtful remarks. Maybe, Virginia, since you have the mic, I'm going to jump straight away and ask you the question. I mean, you have, of course, worked on protected areas for many, many years, and you understand the role that protected areas, ecosystem integrity, the importance of these elements from addressing the climate and the biodiversity crisis, right? But when you look at the current debate that's happening in the climate space, but also at the debate that's happening out there, in the other convention, on the Convention on Biological Diversity, from your perspective, are there things that worry you? Are there things that you think need to be done better, that this community needs to be better aware of, on the one hand, or the CBD community needs to be better aware of from their side? So it'll be really interesting to hear your insights on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandeep, and thank you, everyone. And thanks to a really interesting panel. And I absolutely agree with your comments about perhaps it's time to update the conventions and enshrine some mechanism for getting them to talk to each other and ensure synergistic action. I primarily work, in my day work, on the science relating to climate and biodiversity, and my work does straddle the CBD and the UNFCCC. And another reflection I'll just offer is in 2005, the Millennium Ecosystem Report told us we had already exceeded planetary boundaries. Told us that unless we protected the health of the biosphere, on which, our climate had involved, that we all depended on, we would be in deep trouble by 2020. And guess what? They were right. So the imperative now, from my perspective, and this is increasingly evident in all the science, and you have a very good scientist on your climate crisis commission, who is one of the people I work with, Professor Brendan Mackey. It's the central plank for the success of every Rio Convention is to maintain and enhance or restore ecosystem integrity. If there's one linking concept between the three conventions, it's that they will all fail unless we maintain ecosystems that are in good condition and restore those that are not. And so one of the challenges here in the UNFCCC is it's never recognised that differences in ecosystem condition matter. They matter for the stability of carbon storage in our ecosystems. High integrity ecosystems like primary forests are far more resistant and resilient in the face of threats than secondary natural or monocultures of trees. Now, we can't keep pretending that all carbon in ecosystems is the same. We have to recognise that ecosystem integrity matters and that maintaining ecosystems that are in high condition, good condition, is really essential. It is the number one thing we have to do. So we need now to move the dialogue. We've got two good decisions out of these COPs. One was at COP25, which was 1CP 25 para 15, which was the first decision to call for integrated action to prevent biodiversity loss and climate change. That was a milestone decision. And then, of course, the decision at Glasgow. So we now have to move beyond generalised language to specifics. What are the priorities? What are the priority actions we need to take? And clearly, that's an essential prerequisite if we're going to ensure that action in NDCs and even in the global stocktake needs to reflect on the condition or integrity of ecosystems, because the success or failure of the Paris Agreement actually hinges on whether we can keep the vast amounts of carbon that are stored in our primary ecosystems in them. The key value of forests and natural ecosystems is the longevity of their carbon storage. It's their carbon retention value, it's not the annual sequestration. Now, while ever forests are alive, they still sequester carbon, but if we lose the carbon in primary forests, in just the tropical forests, so put the boreal and temperate to one side for a moment, that's the equivalent of all the fossil fuel emissions since 1750. We cannot succeed in limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees unless we protect our most stable and resilient ecosystems. So that's one message. The other message I have is there are big gaps in the accounting processes around carbon. What are the gaps? Well, they treat all carbon as equal. Whether or not it's in a fossil fuel emission or in the land sector, they don't differentiate between integrity and how that relates to risk. So for financiers, what are your least risky investments? They are to actually help communities develop sustainable, climate-resilient livelihoods based around non-extractive industries, based around protecting their forests. There's no mechanism yet for really reflecting that value, except through a wonderful new ecosystem accounting framework that was developed by the UN Statistical Commission and released last year. It was adopted last year. It's called the acronym is UNCEA. Terrible acronym. But the reference level for that system is an ecosystem in its natural condition. So that's a high integrity reference level. And it's designed to enable state parties to bring the value of their ecosystems into their national accounts, reflect them on their balance sheet, and the value will depend on the integrity of those ecosystems. So suddenly, all the countries with primary forests will have a very valuable asset on their books, and you'll see the recovery potential as well. Anyway, I'll close my remarks there. I've clearly said enough, Sandeep, but there is a lot to do in the UNFCCC.
Great. Thanks so much, Virginia. I mean, clearly you laid it out, the scope of the challenge that exists from a technical and and certainly a scientific and an integrity perspective. Last but certainly not least, Christina, you have been involved in this process for more years than you probably care to remember. You have been a former negotiator for Norway on REDD+ forest-related issues. You're also very familiar with what's happening in the CBD and other intergovernmental processes, and relating back to what Gonzalo said, back in 1992, the world decided to create these 3 separate Rio conventions to deal with land and biodiversity-related issues in these siloed manner, right? But if you look forward, and also bearing in mind that next month we'll be having the COP15 of the CBD, what would be your suggestions to both the processes, the climate, the UNFCCC process as well as the CBD process, in terms of how the 2 processes can work together in an integrated manner to enable this convergence and enable the successful delivery of the climate and nature agendas?
Well, thank you, Sandeep, for this trying question. But before I try to answer, I'd like to congratulate Manuel on the establishment of the Climate Crisis Commission, and as the chair of your sister commission, the World Commission on Environmental Law, I just want to express I'm very much looking forward to working together with you, and I'm sure there will be very important aspects that we can find synergies together. Now, back to your question, Sandeep. The interrelation between climate change and biodiversity, in particular forests, is something that, of course, Norway has worked on for a long time, and as you alluded to, been involved in this for a long time. But it was very clear that if we want to stay somewhere close to the well below 2 degrees, maybe 1.5 degrees temperature goal, we need nature. We need to remove and enhance the sequestration potential, retention potential, keep it where it is, enhance it. And that's something that parties well recognized when they negotiated the Paris Agreement back in 2015. And it's not just recognized in the preamble, but squarely in Article 5. And that's an interesting aspect, because here we have an encouragement to all parties to increase removals both in maritime, terrestrial ecosystems, but it is a provision of the Paris Agreement which is not really operationalized, where we don't have any additional decision, where we don't have any guidance, safeguards, or anything around it. And I think that's something that could be enhanced, could be focused on in the years to come. We have, of course, Article 5.2, where we have REDD+, and where also the Norwegian-Brazilian cooperation found its framework around it, although it's a bilateral cooperation, but it adheres to the framework around REDD+. And here we have safeguards for biodiversity, for social aspects, and these safeguards are worthwhile considering, also in the context of nature-based solutions, which go above and beyond forests. I'm not saying that REDD+ is without failure. There are many, many lessons we have learned and can move on from, but the issue of a clear standard, clear safeguards is absolutely crucial for its success, but also for catalyzing finance behind it. Now, moving on from this convention to biodiversity, and 2 weeks from now, we have, of course, Target 8 in the biodiversity framework draft, the draft for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Target 8 looks at the interrelation between climate change and biodiversity. It talks about the adverse effects of climate change impacts on biodiversity, but also the need for biodiversity increase to address climate change. That perhaps needs further elaboration, further details. The indicator for reporting need to align also with what has been decided here, but we already have in both conventions cross-references, if you want to. What we really need is effective implementation. It's not just the paper tiger that we can agree to and be happy with, but it needs to be implemented, complied with, and updated if science develops.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Christina. So what we need is not a paper tiger, but keeping in spirit with the theme of the Egyptian COP, implementation that is real. So thanks very much for sharing that insight. I think we're doing okay for time. We've got 15 minutes left, so hopefully we'll have 10 minutes for a quick round of Q&A from the floor before I hand back to you, Manuel, for closing remarks. So please, I open the floor for questions. I see one, maybe we can collect a few questions. Don't feel shy, this is an important topic and there is no such thing as a silly question. So please feel free to ask. We are fortunate to have a very distinguished set of panelists here. We should take full advantage of that. Please, sir, and just briefly mention your name, your organization, and ask your question. Thank you.
Mike Paparian, two organizations. First of all, Gustavo, you're one of my heroes. You are, and everybody in this room should know what he's doing. He has aligned his finances to the international climate goals. And I say that under my hat of the Climate Bonds Initiative. We've never met before, but I love you and I love what you do. As a member of WCPA, I don't want to give up that hat, but I do want to put on the hat of Manuel, your Climate Change Commission. Can you tell us more about that and how those of us who want to align these various topics will be able to join you in what you do and help you in what you do?
Thank you. So, did you have a specific question? No, sorry, I missed that last bit. I just see you, Manuel, okay.
I was comfortable sitting there, but okay, I will answer the question. Thank you. Look, the Climate Crisis Commission, it has just been created. And it has been created based in the recognition, first, that we have to be more effective in addressing the climate crisis, but because we recognize that IUCN has a convening power and a strong expertise in addressing mostly the nature side of the equation. So the point is, how can we be more effective by promoting the convergence? So that is why today's event, because as I've mentioned in the beginning of this event, we have nation-based solution. That is the low-hanging fruit. But I am fully sure that there are and there will be some new and innovative mechanism to make effective our actions based in convergence to address the intertwined crisis. And we are exploring that. That will be one of our streamlines. But also we know that we have also a difficult relation in between climate and nature. Not everything is easy. We know that in the current time in which we are expecting for a strong and absolute emission reductions, we have to continue pushing the emitters to fulfill with that and not to use nature to divest their own obligation. So that is something that is why many organizations are saying no offsets. It is not because they hate offsets as a mechanism. It is because what they hate, it is to have somebody greenwashing by using the offsets and avoiding to go straight into fulfilling with their own obligation. That is something that we have to address in an effective way. But even more difficult, we know that net zero means, as it has been mentioned by the Paris Agreement, a combination of emission reductions and removals. The point is, and based in Virginia's knowledge on science, what is that correct balance in between? There is no a formula. It is not as easy as a recipe, no? Number plus this number equal no. No, it is a very difficult one because we are still developing information and data to know exactly what it should be the role of nature to address the climate crisis, and how can we secure that use of nature, it must guarantee ecosystem integrity, that it is a key element. So all of those elements are the kind of thing that as a commission we are planning to address. So early in the next year we will open for the membership, and we will be more clear with our work plan, and we make it surely publicly to be more clear on what are we expecting to address in an effective way, mostly since the beginning of the next year.
Thank you, Manuel. Any other questions from the floor? Please.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to pick up on something that I think Christina spoke about, but it'd be great to hear from the rest of the panel. Looking forward to Montreal kind of in a few weeks' time, what should we be looking out for in terms of biodiversity and nature? What should we be kind of really looking to see or hoping to see? Is that okay? Thank you.
So looking forward to Montreal, what would you hope to see, right? Any other question? Okay, maybe we can just go around each of the panelists to get their response on this question. Maybe I'll start with you, Minister McKellen.
Sure, I'll start. And I'll start again to give the government perspective, and actually a government perspective of a sub-state actor. And one of the things that we are very excited about at Montreal is that we've been working on the Edinburgh process, which Scotland has led, and it's about bringing together sub-state governments, cities, regional governments, to make very clear the role that we believe that they have in tackling both the climate emergency and the nature crisis. Again, this is something that's quite well established in the climate space, and we're trying to mimic that or copy that in the biodiversity space. And the reason we believe that's so important is because if you take the regional governments, the sub-state governments, we are very close to our populations. You know, we're often the ones who they will come to see and they will scrutinise our actions. We also oversee a substantial amount of funding, and together we govern, I think, you know, substantial portions of the population. So we'll be presenting the Edinburgh Declaration, which asks for a formal recognition of sub-state actors within the CBD.
Two points. One on net zero. I think Manuel mentioned it, or several panelists mentioned it. And net zero is already included in Article 4, paragraph 1 of the Paris Agreement, talking about balance between emissions and removals. But net zero probably won't get us to where we need to go. And if we read the IPCC reports, we know that net zero is just the moment where the emissions cross the zero line, but that's not where it stops. It goes on to net negative, and then needs to continue net negative until the end of the century. And net negative means even more removals and retaining of carbon sinks, ecosystems, carbon storage facilities, and I think that is often under-communicated because we have that focus on net zero, which is important, but that's not all. The sentence continues: after 2050 we need to go into net negative, and I think here we really need to think better of how to upscale nature solution, not just forests, but also soils, wetlands, mangroves, and so forth. Your question on what to expect from Montreal, that's really interesting. I mentioned Target 8, which is looking at the interlinkage between climate change and biodiversity. Sorry, it's not me, it's the microphone. And it talks interestingly about avoiding negative impacts of climate and adaptation measures on biodiversity. And for every target, we will also have indicators, probably framework indicators and some more granular indicators in order to measure progress on the achievement of targets over time. Now, when we look at this process here, we don't really have any safeguards for biodiversity for parties' climate measures. We have a recognition of human rights in the preamble, but we have no equivalent to biodiversity or ecosystem integrity when it comes to parties' climate and mitigation and adaptation measures. That's now something that suddenly is being taken up in the context of the CBD and the post-2020 biodiversity framework. So looking at the Target 8, its development, we only have a draft negotiation text. We have, of course, not the final outcome yet, but also the development of the reporting indicators will be very interesting, very important to follow, also to see whether there is consistency between the two processes.
Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you. Target 8 is actually what I'm following in particular. Does this one work better? Okay. Target 8 is something I'm particularly interested in at the CBD because there was a very helpful workshop last year held by IPBES and the IPCC, which was actually welcomed by the CBD but not by the UNFCCC. That workshop was transformational in some ways. It identified very clearly that if we fail on one crisis, we'll fail on both, that each crisis amplifies the other, and that synergistic action under all conventions should be encouraged. They identified what synergistic action looks like, and the top two priorities were the protection and restoration of carbon and species-rich ecosystems. So language that mirrors the IPBES IPCC workshop I think is important to include in Target 8 and also in Target 8 to reflect on the fact that maintaining and restoring the integrity of ecosystems is essential for limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. It's an essential mitigation and adaptation action. So those are the kinds of things I'm looking for in Target 8, and I'm also looking elsewhere in some of the other targets to actually recognise that primary ecosystems really must be retained. And there's an opportunity in Target 1 or Target 3 to include language on retaining high integrity natural ecosystems. And I absolutely agree with you, Christina, that it is somewhat tragic that the UNFCCC has neither operationalised the ecosystem provisions of the convention itself or the Paris Agreement. That is a major gap that needs to be addressed quite rapidly.
I will follow your comment, and I won't be so specific on the question we did and trying to, I would say, dream longer. And I'll make a comment here, Manuel, being very, very careful because I'm not English native speaking on the words. As a financial agent, we need something simple, and I agree with her comment fully that we need to act fast on the ecosystem preservation. In order to do that, for a financial agent, it's better to have something simpler to be used that somehow is not 100% correct and you fix along the way than by doing nothing and wait for a lot of years for the scientists to be 100% agreeing in some terms and then to deploy that. And I will explain my rationale here. The only way we can preserve the primary forest is through a decentralized market. We need to create markets where we pay and buy and sell ecosystem services for primary forests. And the way we are going to do that is by having very simple metrics or taxonomy that somehow they are wrong, but they represent some value, and then by doing that we create a network. Because again, someone that's coming to this world for the last 5 years, for us bankers, is very difficult to translate what the scientists are trying to say into on the ground tasks. So my recommendation is that better to be fast and be somehow wrong than take too long to have a scientific consensus and be 100% right, because you don't have this time. And the analogy I like to make is on the blockchain and crypto market. If you see the last 10 years, what has been happening on the blockchain market, it's amazing. We're creating a network of crypto and blockchain assets that will likely disrupt the internet in a few years. And how do they get there? Being very simple, being decentralized, and committing a lot of mistakes in the way. But what has been built is a huge infrastructure network to trade blockchain assets. We must have the same way of thinking here to create this ecosystem market. So having a short-term consensus that we know is not 100% correct, but then we can direct to bankers and companies in order to offset their actions to ecosystem services, and then to the consensus here, year after year, you may be fixing the adjustments or the terminology with more real-time data. Because once you have the network and the market operating, you are going to collect a lot of data from the market. Oh, that's greenwashing, that's wrong, that's correct. And then you fix little by little. But the most important thing is creating the network to trade, buy and sell ecosystem services. And I like the analogy of the blockchain. And forgive me for some comments. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be scientific based, it should be. But we know that there is some margin of error. But being fast and simple is much more effective at the last mile.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. Well, I agree very much on what Gustavo has just said, not only in terms of the importance of having the right type of signals for all of the stakeholders, but also for the parties to be able to progress much faster. We cannot wait 2 more years, and we know that. I mean, those 2 years will be a very hard load to carry. Therefore, I do expect that science should be providing enough evidence for Gustavo to be comfortable, but also for every member of the WWF and the AUCN to be comfortable as well. I think that is feasible, and I think that we have enough knowledge to get there. Also, I would expect that we can come out with a compelling narrative that is not only compelling but also practical in order to bring more organizations, countries, people on board into the importance of biodiversity and the importance of tackling many crises through biodiversity. But also what I mostly expect, honestly, is that we can come out of CBD with more money flowing into biodiversity. If the CBD in Montreal is successful, we will operationalize so much interest that we're seeing from the financial institutions and businesses all around the world that are watching over the bench, like trying to participate in this beautiful challenge about not only conserving but restoring nature. But we need to see the conditions for all of that money and interest to flow in the proper way. I honestly think that that is absolutely possible, and that is my main expectation when it comes to my role as climate champion on the CBD. How can we help you, Manuel, to make that happen so we can allow what is already a very big interest to become very concrete actions that will concretely restore biodiversity all around the world.
Great. Thank you so much for those series of interventions. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard a wide range of perspectives. Please join me in thanking all our panelists for all the fantastic comments and learnings and experiences that they have shared. And Manuel, I now hand over to you to do the final closing remarks.
I think that we are running out of time, extremely out of time, but thank you for the panelists, fantastic, thank you for your participation. And let me say one phrase based on what Cristina told us, the net zero or the net negative. Even more challenging, it will be the fact of, I hope that this won't happen if we lost the 1.5. No, I don't know how many of you read not the last, but the one before of the last issue of The Economist. No, bye-bye 1.5, that is the front page. So the point is that we will have strong challenges if that happens. And that is the kind of thing that the Commission could and should start to think on. Because we have to be well prepared, we have to continue pushing this process to avoid to have that situation. But we have to also think in all the scenarios. And we have to be well prepared in those cases. Let's insist with the 1.5 politically, also in the implementation, but also let's think what can we do in the worst scenario if happens. I hope not. But thank you very much for your participation and to you all. Thank you.